Welcome, one and all, to the Viper's Nest. And first off, thank you guys for blowing up my Superman video. I was not expecting that, but it is definitely appreciated. I really appreciate you guys getting that video as much circulation as it did, and the likes and the comments. Special shout out to Kanan Crystal Wing and I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, I'm sorry, Anshul Data, for commenting on that video. It's nice to know that there are people out there listening to me just blathering on about my favorite superhero. So, in light of the fact that you guys just seem to enjoy me talking about my favorite comic stuff, I'm going to make another one for you. Here we go. So, this one's going to be on the Marvel side of things, and there hasn't ever really been any Marvel comic line that's affected me as deeply as the Death and Return of Superman line did. But I'm going to talk about one of my favorites, and specifically something that's been argued back and forth in my friends group for probably almost 15 years at that point, and that is going to be Marvel Civil War. So obviously this is not a picture of the comics cover or the movie covers, but when I was searching for an image to use, I found this, and I really liked it because I really like fighting games. So this is a piece of artwork done by a person on DeviantArt named Sinister Carrot, and it's their interpretation of what a Marvel Civil War fighting game would look like had it been developed by NetherRealm Studios. I saw it, I loved it, so I chose this particular screen to use. I will be leaving a link to Sinister Carrot's DeviantArt page in the description of the video, so please go show them some love. Anyway, so we are going to be talking specifically about the comics Civil War and not the movie Civil War. And here's why. While I liked the Civil War movie well enough, I kind of found the motivations of the characters for doing what they did kind of, I don't know, it just didn't really click for me. Like, for example, Tony Stark saying that the Avengers need, like, government oversight. Now, I do understand where he's coming from. Getting almost literally slapped in the face with a picture of the one of your, well, not specifically his victims, but one of the victims of the conflict that Iron Man was a part of, specifically the Sokovia incident with Ultron. I mean, getting essentially slapped in the face that way, that'd be a wake-up call to anybody, sure enough. But then for him to flip over so quickly to, like, wanting government oversight is kind of ridiculous because, like, at the very beginning of Iron Man 2, Tony literally gave, like, a whole ridiculous speech before Congress that he was not going to turn over himself or his technology to the government, which, I mean, I guess never let it be said that Tony Stark doesn't learn from his mistakes, because he absolutely does. That's a meme now. But, I don't know, at the same time, it just rings hollow. Like, you flipped over so easily, and then you're still siding with the government, and let's not forget that at that point in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, not all that long ago, that government was Hydra. And then, like, on the other side of things, Captain America essentially just unilaterally saying that, look, where the Avengers go and what we do, that the final decision has to lie with us, which, again, fair criticism. Never let it be said that I don't respect the hell out of Captain America, because I do, but if you're commanding a group as powerful as the Avengers, having such a small group having the final say of where you go and what you do, or where you don't go and what you don't do, it seems irresponsible to me. Like, you know what I mean? You're wielding some of the greatest, like, essentially the greatest power on Earth outside of, like, you know, Doctor Strange or, like, Doctor Doom if he ever makes it into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Essentially, the Avengers are the most powerful force on Earth, and just having such a small group being able to make essentially whatever decisions they want and tell everyone else to, get stuffed. Yeah, it's irresponsible. The point is, I was not a fan of the decision making. The characters utilized in the movie, but I still like the movie well enough. Anyway, we're going to talk about the comics version because the comics version of the Civil War is much more nuanced and understandable and interesting. So, for those who don't know, Marvel's Civil War was a comic run back in, it either started in 2006 or 2007. One of those two. Anyway, so the whole freaking clusterfuck that is the Civil War began with a team of superheroes, young superheroes, known as the New Warriors. And they were in a town called Stamford in Connecticut, and they were tracking down some supervillains. And they were doing it for a reality show. And what ended up happening is one of these supervillains was a guy known as Nitro, and his superpower is he literally explodes and then pulls himself back together later, and then continues about his business exploding again and again, whatever. So anyway, they find the supervillains, a fight ensues. I think it was Namorita ends up tackling Nitro and then giving him the whole you're under arrest speech, blah blah blah, and he says, "Don't you even know you're playing with the big boys now?" And then he self-detonates, wiping out a very large chunk of Stamford, Connecticut. I think there were over 600 dead, and 12 of them were little kids who were playing at a nearby park. It was a really fucked up thing to do. And the whole thing was caught live on TV. So the New Warriors committed a bit of an oopsie there, you might say. So the whole world literally saw this thing go down, and that drove the government to install what is known as the Superhuman Registration Act, where anyone operating as a superhero or vigilante or whatever, taking the law into their own hands, I suppose you could call it, has to specifically register their identity with the government so that they can then receive proper training, oversight, logistical support. So a lot of people, back when this comic was coming out, I remember, thought that meant superheroes had to publicly reveal their identities, which some of them, like Spider-Man, did. That wasn't really the case. That wasn't the case. It was specifically them having to register with the government. Now, understandably, a lot of heroes were reticent to do this because, well, let's face it, the U.S. government is not exactly a perfect entity, especially in the comics. So, I mean, if they did register, there is every chance in the world that their identity could be stolen or leaked or whatever. It wasn't what they had to do. They just had to register with the government. So it was, in my opinion, it was not as bad as what a lot of people were making it out to be. Point is, this split the superhero community in two. Half of them wanted to register, half of them did not. And if you take a look at this, again, very nice character select screen designed by Sinister Carrot, you can see a lot of the major names that fell on both sides of the conflict. So Captain America ended up leading the anti-registration movement, those who did not want to sign up with the government, and Iron Man ended up championing the pro-registration side. Now, if you can tell by the comic's name, Civil War, they essentially went to war over this, the superhero community did. And it tore the Marvel world, at least on Earth, it tore it a new asshole. It was a bloody, violent, ridiculously destructive conflict, and both sides did some very, very questionable things. The anti-registration side straight up, started resorting to assassination. The pro-registration side started setting up detention camps that, I think it was Magneto, actually, straight up compared them to, Nazi concentration camps. This fight was not good for anybody. And it also split the comic readers community in two. Like, at least among my somewhat small friend group, probably of about 20, 30 friends who are reading this comic line, it split us right down the middle. I'm not going to cover the entirety of this comic run, because even if I weren't living the lifestyle of a stay-at-home dad of two, I do not have the time or the energy to engage in such things. So you got a very brief overview as to the who's and the whys of this particular conflict. So what I'm going to talk about today is like where I came down on the side of pro versus anti-registration and why. So in the end, after a lot of going back and forth, because in the comics both sides did in fact have very good points, I ended up coming down on the pro-registration side of the Superhuman Registration Act. So here's why. In the context of the story presented, specifically the explosion of Stamford, Connecticut, if the new warriors had had proper training and logistical support and oversight, the chances of Nitro having self-detonated and destroyed that town, while not completely gone, I think would have been a lot smaller. There's a much smaller chance that that would have happened had they had proper oversight, in my opinion. I am 110% willing to be convinced wrong if someone would like to argue the point, but that's where I stood on it. It wouldn't have happened if they'd had the proper support. Because if they had been, like, actively working with, like, I don't know, S.H.I.E.L.D., or even just, like, had the backing of, like, Tony Stark or the Fantastic Four, they could have been like, hey, we're going after this specific group, and there's this one guy who can explode. Can you build us something that will, help us contain him? And, definitely Tony Stark and Reed Richards would have easily been smart enough to do exactly that, and they would have been able to contain Nitro probably without incident. That's my thoughts on the matter. Stamford, Connecticut was the catalyst for the Superhuman Registration Act, and the perfect example of why I think the Superhuman Registration Act would have been necessary. That's just me. I can absolutely understand the other side of the argument, even though I think as time has gone on, the whole concept of, the government not knowing who you are as a superhero is kind of fucking ridiculous, especially nowadays. Nowadays, with 2023 technology, magnified to the scope of what they tend to have in the Marvel, both comics and cinematic universe, thinking the government doesn't know who the hell you are is honestly absurd, in my opinion. Even probably without government backing, I'm imagining it took Tony Stark all of, 10 minutes to figure out who Spider-Man was, to learn that he was Peter Parker, so then he could go recruit Peter Parker to help him, fight against Captain America and his rebels. So if the government wants to know who you are, S.H.I.E.L.D. probably has an entire division specifically devoted to figuring out the secret identity of superheroes. So thinking the government doesn't know who you are, especially nowadays, absolutely ridiculous. That should be a non-subject among the arguments of the Superhuman Registration Act at this point. But at the same time, the original comic run did also start in the mid-2000s, so we definitely didn't have that level of tech back then. Anyway, so like I said, I ended up on the pro-registration side. I genuinely think that the Superhuman Registration Act, hopefully, if people keep their shit together, would have done a lot more good than harm. Again, I'm willing to be convinced of the other side of the argument. Anyway, so continuing on from here, you have these two opposing viewpoints, pro and anti-registration, both with very good points for and against. So I was actually thinking, where's the middle ground here? Where is the center point where both sides can get what they want? The heroes with their secret identities can be kept secret, but also they can be given the proper training and oversight of the pro-registration side. And the more I thought about it, I think the more I realized that we kind of already have something like that in the Marvel Universe. It's called the Young Avengers Initiative. And it's essentially exactly what it sounds like. It's the old school Avengers training the next generation of Avengers. So, here is what I would propose for the middle ground of this argument. Get some of the old boys, like get Iron Man, Captain America, Hulk, the Fantastic Four, some of the more veteran X-Men like Storm and Wolverine and Cyclops. Those, get a bunch of people together who have been in the hero game for a really, really long time and have them establish like their own separate thing. Like maybe have it tied to SHIELD, maybe don't. Maybe have it be a privately funded organization by Stark Tech and the Baxter Foundation. Get all the rich superheroes in on this to start funding this. I don't want to call it Young Avengers because I feel like what I might be presenting here is going to be a little bit different. I don't know. Let's just call it Superhero Boot Camp. There we go. Have them get together and fund this Superhero Boot Camp, and have them start pulling in all the youngins, the new heroes out there, and having them get them all trained up to the point where they get the old school people's stamp of approval. And once they have that stamp of approval, then they can be sent out into the world to can start doing their superhero stuff, while you have the Old Boys Foundation keeping an eye on them and providing support. Like, again, Stamford wouldn't have happened if the New Warriors had been in a position to be like, call up Tony Stark and be like, hey, we need an anti-nitro device, can you get us one? And then Stark would be like, yeah, guys, I got you, no worries. And, have them have that open back and forth line of communication between the new guys and the veterans, to the point where that if things got bad enough, then they can just instantly call upon the veteran Avengers to come help them out. And for the person who would lead this superhero boot camp, my vote would specifically go to Charles Xavier, Professor X. With a few hiccups in his past, I think he would be the best for this superhero boot camp, because Xavier's always been very good at taking the big picture view. He is always trying to do right by mutants, trying to make sure that mutants have proper representation, that people aren't being bigoted against them, always fighting for mutant rights, but never in a way that is completely detrimental to the rest of the world at large. Which, as much as I love Magneto, has always been a problem, because Magneto is very much mutants first, which, completely understandable. He was in a Nazi concentration camp, for God's sake, I get it. So, that would be my thought. Set up a privately funded superhero boot camp, install Charles Xavier at its head, have him help train up the next generation of superheroes, and if you manage to pull that off, then I think there's a very, very large chance that we wouldn't have a repeat of Stamford, Connecticut. That's just me. And then naturally, because it's a privately funded organization, you could have the, new incoming superheroes. Even if they didn't want to reveal their secret identities, again, it wouldn't be that hard to find out in today's day and age, but, they might not have to. And if they wanted to, then their identities would be known, but also be able to be protected, again, by the privately funded and operated superhero boot camp. Anyway, that's my idea. I would like to hear what other people think, so feel free to sound off in the comments below. I'd like to know if you were pro or anti-registration, if you went through this comic line back in the day like I did. Be an interesting conversation to have. Keep it civil in the comments. Don't start a civil war in my comments. Keep it light, keep it fun. I'd love to see it. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. A like and a subscribe would be appreciated. See you next episode. And as always, have yourself a wonderful day.